So welcome to the Griff at FHS podcast. And I have some very special guests with me here today. I've got Ada, who's the CEO of the Together Group. And with us, we also have Chris and Martin from the Future Laboratory, which is one of my favorite Futurecaster organizations. I have to say, I've been following you guys for years, so I'm delighted to have you on the show today. But Ada, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Together Group and how everyone kind of fits together?
Yes, absolutely. So Together Group is a collection of curated agencies that operate in the creative marketing and technology world. We have under our portfolio 9 different agencies that offer complementary services within the luxury and lifestyle space. And we offer anything from research to brand strategy to creative design to content to PR and social media, to talent management and experiential. And the Together Group has been operating for about 3 years, but the agencies in the portfolio have been operating for about 15 to 20 years. All of the agencies we have a 1 or 2 creative geniuses, like I like to call them, at the helm, that are really superb at their craft. And they have been leading their teams for a very long time. At the moment, the group has 18 studios globally and over 500 employees across all of these territories. And very excitingly, we opened our group HQ in Riyadh.
I think that's
last
very
year.
exciting and quite unusual, I have to say, which really sets you guys kind of apart.
Absolutely. So we have our HQ in London, our HQ in Riyadh, from which we lead operations really in the region, but with a very specific strategic focus in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, just because of all of the activity and transformation that is happening. The most exciting part, I would say, about Together Group in the Middle East is the fact that we really operate the group as a group, which means all of our clients get access to what we call an external CMO partnership, where we orchestrate a task force of all of our global agencies and global expertise to deliver a very comprehensive full service strategy for them. And I would say that's definitely the most exciting part of actually being able to operate here.
And let me ask you, so Chris and Martin kind of fit into that ecosystem, obviously, with their work, with the Future Laboratory. And one of the interesting things that you've done, and you've pulled on their resources to create this new codes of luxury in Saudi Arabia. We'll get onto that in a moment. But first, I just want to bring Chris and Martin into the conversation. Can you guys set the scene a little bit and tell us, the big picture of some of the kind of the impactful trends that we're seeing at the moment in hospitality?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Jennifer. It's really good to be joining you today. Thank you for inviting us. I'm Chris Sanderson, and I'm Chief Creative Officer at the Future Laboratory, as well as being one of its co-founders along with Martin. And I suppose if we maybe start from the outside before we look inwards at what's going on specifically in Saudi Arabia, there are some really interesting global trends in luxury that we've been observing that do, I think, fit very, very nicely with the opportunities that we see developing within the kingdom. And these we talk about in our report, but in general, what we're seeing with luxury is some very interesting things. The first is the continued focus on the ultra-luxury consumer and the understanding that many of our key luxury brands have realized, which is that there is a continued thirst amongst luxury consumers who are within the upper echelons of wealth, so our high net worth individuals and our ultra high net worth individuals, for increasingly special hospitality experiences that are often very branded. Think about the growth, for example, of the Belmont Group since its acquisition by LVMH, and that many of these very time-honored properties that were distinct in their own right are now increasingly being recognized as being part of Belmont. So this sense of the continued branding of luxury hospitality is very important. It's moved towards ultra luxury. And in tandem with that, we've got a couple of other really interesting growth areas that I think fit very neatly into what that almost the policy seems to be in Saudi, which is memberships, exclusive memberships, which is tied into the growth of the residential category, the growth of high-end resi. And then finally, this focus on health and wellness, which is, again, I think a very interesting area for us to discuss maybe within this podcast.
And no, that sounds very interesting. And I mean, when you say branded, you know, you mentioned Belmont and LVMH. What are some other kind of brands that are putting their stamp in the area of hospitality?
Well, of course, one of the first of our international brands to really make a headway in the kingdom was Six Senses, and one of the first of this new generation of resorts to open. And so I think what we've seen from a global player like Six Senses is a really good indicator of both the level, the standard, and the style of resort properties that we're likely to see moving forward over the next 5 to 10 years. If you look at a brand like One and Only, for example, and what they've done recently in one of your neighboring countries within the Middle East, in the UAE, with the launch of one of their new sister properties, which has a real focus on high-end sport and fitness. I think, again, we get this really interesting indicator of how increasingly global brands are wanting to have a greater footprint in the Middle East, and specifically in Saudi, but are not simply seeing it as a market in which they're going to deliver cookie-cutter brands that have been successful elsewhere. In fact, they are being encouraged, and they are seeing this as an opportunity to take actually a next step in their luxury journey and to do something often quite different.
I think that is probably the biggest shift we are seeing, because if you think about globally, you have what I'm calling different zones of engagement. So you're seeing different countries and different cultures promote either entertainment as a core USP to attract tourists, or they're looking at well-being, wellness, culture, the arts. So I think you begin to see a pattern how I suspect that Saudi, having to look at what was happening across the world in terms of travel and tourism, and I guess against its kind of Vision 2030 plan, had to choose one of two routes. Either you choose the route of, and I think Dubai has done it hugely successfully, which is this great entertainment, party, what I call the forever holiday experience, or you go, okay, increasingly at the luxury end, we are thinking about, you know, ultra high net leisure. We're thinking about well-being, longevity, health. We're also thinking about, as Chris said, the uniqueness of experience. So customization and the notion of personalization. And those things, there are terms a lot of luxury brands use. And as you know, very few of them deliver it. And I think what Saudi has really cleverly done is to define its category, to set the expectation. Because if you look at NEOM, or you look at some of the Red Sea plans laid out, even if a third of those plans were realized, it would be far better, more beautiful and innovative and challenging than 100% done in other countries. So with that framework, if you're a tourist industry person, you're a hotel group going in, you have to set your bar higher. It would be impossible not to. So also, you have to think about service differently. You have to think about experience differently and how you deliver it. So suddenly, where in a lot of countries they can go in with different levels of luxury, the entry point is among the highest in the first place. So even the lowest bar is actually the highest when you have to think about it. And that means, of course, as we know, innovation, imagination, the way we engage with people has to be hugely different. And that is vital in a market where everybody is chasing two types of traveler. One, the under 30s, and two, the ultra high net worth. And where do you find both of those people located? 63% in Saudi, under 30. 30 million is going to be the average for over 350,000 people. And 30 million, somebody said to me, is what they call poor billionaires. they? Because they only have 30 to 50 million. And I found that really good. Where are they mostly located? Actually in Riyadh.
This is really interesting because I think we've kind of jumped on to looking in depth at, the Saudi population. And I just wanted to come on to Ada. So I think you've been in Saudi for how long now? You're actually living there.
Yes, and a half.
So you've got a good understanding kind of the market, having lived there, been doing business there. And I also feel like you've really grasped the opportunity that is the Saudi luxury consumer. And so do you want to tell us a little bit about why you've commissioned this report and worked together with Chris and Martin to put together the new codes of luxury?
Yes, absolutely. So what we wanted to do as Together Group was come into the market and add value in a very relevant and objective way. So obviously with the HQ being in Riyadh, I'm leading the region for the group, but I also live here and I've lived here for 2.5 years. We thought who better than one of our agencies, the Future Laboratory, to really craft something that was tremendously of value. And what we wanted to do with that is really lay out the reality of what we see by being present in the kingdom and tell this to the global community. In a way, like I call it, is help Saudi export Saudi. And to me, personally, it's almost like a love letter to the kingdom because it's been very rigorously crafted, but at the same time, it has a positive intent of definitely moving away from stereotypes and giving voice to experts who are here transforming the country and who truly have a pulse of what's happening here, as opposed to what other people may think or what other people really may read. To me, Saudi is one of the world's most exciting territories for business, for transformation, for personal growth. And the report really tells the world about this very particular agenda that KSA has, which is tremendously different from the rest of the Middle East, but also different from really the rest of the world. And the reason why we called the report New Codes of Luxury, it's because it tells you about not only how the Saudi consumes, Saudi consumer consumes today, but most importantly, how will they consume in the future? And this is relevant because we're talking about 2, 3, 5, 8 years from now. And we know that every global brand coming here, every local brand that operates or wants to operate will potentially not operate until the next 2, 3, 4, 8 years until Vision 2030. So really the report provides a roadmap to these brands who are saying, okay, I'm coming to the kingdom today, but I'm not opening until 2030. And that roadmap gives them a bit of a guide to say, are your products going to be relevant by the time you will open your doors? And it's probably the only piece right now in the kingdom that can help brands assess whether what they're doing today, it's really going to be successful for the Saudi luxury consumer of the future.
So I think what you touched on there is really interesting because there's a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes, I think, about the Saudi consumer. And as someone who's lived in the Middle East for 15 years and been going to Saudi for the last 10, it's very different to what, when I go home to Australia and I talk to people about Saudi, it's there's a very different perception. So I think what you've created will be incredibly valuable for people to understand, as you said, coming into the market, not just what's happening now, but in the future. So let me ask the three of you, what for you, there's so much in the report, there's a lot that we could go through, but can you talk us through some of the key points about the kind of emerging cohorts in the Saudi luxury market? I think that's really interesting how you broke it down.
Yeah, and just to your point there, Jennifer, as well, one of the key people that we interviewed for our research for this report was His Highness Prince Bandar, who, as I'm sure many of our listeners will know, is intimately involved with hospitality, the hospitality industry in terms of what he does from a commercial perspective, as well as his position across some government roles. And one of the things he said to us was the first thing businesses should do before coming to Saudi Arabia is to throw the ideas that they have about Saudi consumers out the door. And, the response that we got to that within the report, some people that have come back to us who've read it have said, again, blowing open the doors and changing perceptions and mindsets is partly what we wanted this report to do. And we could only do that successfully by really looking at what was going on in Saudi from the outside in, and by talking to Saudis across different industries, as well as those who are going to be the key engagers of this new luxury hospitality environment that we're seeing. Because again, I think the perception is that this is being built purely for an international market. And when we spoke to Rosanna Chopra, for example, from the Red Sea Project, what was really clear was that actually one of the primary consumers of this new hospitality market will be Saudis themselves. And so identifying in our report, as we do, to come to your point, the fact that we have one of the highest concentrations of ultra-luxurians anywhere in the world, we have an increasingly engaged and wealthy female consumer, which is really, really important. And then, of course, we have one of the highest concentrations of young people under the age of 30 anywhere on the planet. And it's this combination of these factors that I think is one of the things that we're starting to see driving change. I mean, 63% of Saudis are under the age of 30. So if you take into account that idea of a driving young population with a different mindset, an ambition, and a desire to see their country change and to grow and to become more accepted on a global stage, but also to be a powerhouse for innovation, you then throw in female empowerment, and then you look at the ability to actually look at what they've done before and look at the legacy that they have as an extremely sophisticated luxury market and luxury consumer, then I think you have a very interesting catalyst for change and for growth.
I mean, one of, I think, the key differences of the report, and this is why I always think when, as a business, we're looking at reports commenting on markets or consumer groups or behaviors, we try to actually reverse it and go, well, what are they telling us about the market? Because a lot of the time it's outsiders looking in. And what we try to do is, okay, pretty much all of the, I think, key interviews or people we spoke to, with the exception of 2, work or live or are part of this 2030 vision. So when you think about Chris's comment about, over 63% are under 30. So that's one level of looking at it. But what are they telling you about being a young person in Saudi? And that was a question because I was chatting to a lot of, I guess, kind of hotel groups who are involved in social media, and they were using things like TikTok, and they were using things like Instagram. And we were going, interesting. Saudi is peculiar in that the majority of people under 30 use Snapchat. So in itself, to see how perception versus reality of question is hugely interesting. The number of female entrepreneurs, again, looking at the figures, 139,000 licenses granted to take up work or to set up, actually, to found businesses in innovation. When I checked that against UK figures, it was double the number. So if you're kind of measuring female entrepreneurs in the UK doing that and female entrepreneurs in Saudi, so these are the things that the report was trying to explode, not just the myth or the tropes, but let's look at the evidence and the figures and use that to challenge people's perception.
Because I think that's so interesting, Martin, because for me, I've always come across really strong female founders and businesswomen in Saudi Arabia. And I think this is one of the myths that I've come across, is that people don't see that side necessarily of the kind of empowered businesswoman in Saudi, which is now coming to the forefront more, and something that I think is great that your report has highlighted as well, because it's there, but it hasn't necessarily been publicized or given a voice.
I think it's there, and probably Ada will know more about this. I think it doesn't suit the general perception, and I find in a lot of these cases, people are reluctant to accept change. We know this from our work generally. They're reluctant to accept change because it means, personally, they have to think about the future. And a lot of us don't want to think about the future. It's really uncomfortable, and it requires a lot of brain power and effort and a lot of compromise. And the notion that we could be wrong. And I think what we also tried to get in the report was to not talk about the vision, that, this kind of slightly abstract 2030, but to show it. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Where are the places of change, the locations of the city? And I wasn't being frivolous when I'd said that, if a third of these projects were realized, it would be greater than the majority that are happening around the world. Because if you think about sustainability, you think about this push to zero carbon. In many countries, we have to do it in a staged, staggered manner. There are too many vested interest groups preventing us from getting to, zero carbon straight away. However, if I'm building cities from hugely beautiful and visionary plans, and yes, it may take me longer than it told me in the brochure when I looked at it, but if I still get there within the time frame, that's a huge achievement. And one of the other things in the report, because again, I'm going to challenge people when they say, sustainability, concerns about the environment are very much about a Western privileged view of what we think about the planet. When we did our survey in Future Poll, we discovered that over 87%, that's a high number of people, said that it was important, hugely important, to engage with brands that are ethical or sustainable. So again, challenging the trope that it's just a kind of white Western view that we should be thinking about ecology. And what is more interesting, I think this is where you also need to push back on critics, because they always go, oh yes, but it's, are they talking about sustainability in the way we understand it? Yes, they are, but actually better so. Because if I see a hotel resort like Six Senses, for example, and they're installing 760,000 solar panels to fuel the entire resort, I go, okay, so what are you doing with your cheap little windmill and your tiny car battery and your hybrid, not even electric, but your hybrid vehicles running around the resort? So I do think that we really were trying to just invert those myths and stories and give people new points to discuss and new references to bring into those arguments, which is what it always comes down to. And we said, let's get to the facts, let's get to the evidence, and let's get to the stories. And I think that's what the report has done.
No, I think absolutely. It is really, it's fascinating reading. And I think that also you mentioned, Ada, for you having lived there for the last 2.5 years as well, what are some of the kind of common misconceptions that you feel that the report is dispelling, that businesses kind of assume when you've dealt with businesses coming into the market?
Yes, I think it does two things. So one, in terms of business, and two, in terms of people. So in terms of business is definitely the understanding that there is more than, for example, an FMCG strong industry. So we're looking at how many industries are popping up. We have fashion, we have arts, we have culture, we have creativity, which normally Saudi is not strongly attributed to. But once you live here, you truly realize entrepreneurship is really big. Saudi pride is really big. They're coming up with amazing homegrown brands across wellness, across beauty, across fashion. And that is very, very little talked about. Arts and creativity is huge. And that is, again, something that we don't see. We don't see these artists and these individuals that are doing something different in the global platforms in the world. And it's probably time that we see those individuals there. Going to sustainability as well, like Martin said, I think one of the key points is preservation alongside with sustainability. And is that false misconception of Saudi's not green, Saudi doesn't care. And it's truly not. You see these beautiful projects, especially like Red Sea, where it's all about preserving this untapped territory and these amazing waters and these amazing dunes and amazing corals. And that is something that the industry globally probably doesn't know, probably hasn't read about. But the report puts it as very evident. And then when we go into people, I think the Saudi luxury consumer is quite, and we heard this from everyone, like Chris said, we heard this from absolutely everyone. So when it comes to the Saudi luxury consumer, I think they're not as highly regarded as being very conscious. And this is what we see here, is way more conscious about what they're buying, way more conscious about the narrative of the product, conscious about is this product going to last? Is this product sustainable? What's the craft behind the product? So there's a lot of intelligence going behind those purchases, more than just the pure opulence, which I think that's the stereotype. And definitely a strong, and we saw this as well, a strong demand from the local culture to say to global brands, I need to see myself reflected in this collection. I want and deserve the same quality of creative that goes behind that amazing collection in Paris. What about the collection in Saudi? We're not just going to purchase whatever is put into these stores. We actually want you to make an effort to represent our heritage and to represent who we are. And that is where we see a strong entrepreneurship coming up, because those are the Saudi luxury brands that in the future will go global. And we had one of the interviewees speak about the abaya, and we had another interviewee as well, being an abaya designer herself, and how that luxury brand is coming up as very strong in the community, with even someone quoting the abaya can go global. And how do you really export Saudi to the rest of the world?
So that's interesting, because one of I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but I know in the report it said that there was very much an affinity with Saudi brands. So there was a desire to see Saudi founded local brands, which I think is very interesting. It's not just the kind of the global international luxury houses that people are after. Is that something that you see increasing over time?
Without a doubt. And I think, again, that's one of the things that our research that we conducted with Saudi nationals, affluent Saudi nationals, brought up, was this desire to actually invest and support national brands and the growth of a national identity when it comes to luxury. And I think this is one of the key areas for development over the next 10 years that I think we'll see emerge really very strongly, which is less of an idea that luxury is simply about heritage brands from Italy or from France, and it's increasingly about brands that can demonstrate relevancy because they really understand a notion of local identity, national identity.
Yeah, I think it's dual issue, because if you look at historically, brands from Italy, France particularly, were seen to be, the heritage brand, to Chris's point, and they were about creating these great other moments that allowed us to demonstrate our wealth differently. So if I bought a local designer, I was demonstrating my kind of lack of sophistication, my lack of culture, my lack of kind of international travel, and therefore I tended to go for those brands I was visiting while I was on holiday or doing business or whatever. I think there is not just an increase in national brands. I think what you're also seeing is that international brands will start showing more regularly at the fashion weeks. Why that's important? When that happens, it elevates both brands in positioning to the local consumer. Because what they're then seeing is local designers recognize that now they're competing not just with the national market, but with their international competitors. That uplifts value across the board, one. Two, it sort of allows both parties and representatives to reflect culture differently. So what you don't get in that sense is, and we've used the word national, I think there is also nationalistic. So if I look at China at the moment, what I'm seeing are nationalistic brands coming through, which are brands that reflect a wholly reactionary throwback view of where culture is coming from. And by buying that, I'm demonstrating that I believe in the nationalistic agenda, not the national agenda. So I think what with the vision, so you've got this vision about the future, you've got increased pride and understanding, you've got a growing population of under 30s who are equally traveling. If you look at the number of those people who are now traveling internationally and bringing back different ideas, different cross-fertilization, their presence in social media, they're not confined to looking at local influencers, although they are. They have this kind of international flood of thinking and ideas. So with that, a designer or equivalent who thinks that it's okay to produce a brand that's just national and local without understanding the person looking at it has been either abroad physically or metaphysically via social media, it really increases and improves the skill, the talent, the competition. And I think also one of the two things that came out of the report is the focus on customization, personalization, quality, and the notion of legacy. So while previously we would have been buying for the season or the moment, we're now, I don't know if you look at things like My Teresa and that, where suddenly people want to buy pieces that they will gift or hand over to their daughters, their sons, their family. And what you're beginning to see there is also that kind of wider understanding of what sustainability is. You know, it's not always just confined to, as somebody said, sort of the glumness of sacrifice. It can be about buying something beautiful and preserving that and handing it on. And all of those things are the sign of how a market self-determines, how it embraces different values and builds it into its own, well, not just culture, but the legacy it plans to leave. And I think they're the kind of the more subtle bits that came out of the report. Because again, I'm a business person making a decision. When we worked on this report, it had to be something that when you came away from it, you could make a decision that was about investment, or about business, or about location. Not just about, oh gosh, isn't Saudi great? I must think about it on my international purchasing list for the next 5 years. You know, that wasn't the intention of the report.
So just quickly, Martin, on that, and Ada and Chris, obviously our audience is focused on the hospitality space, but specifically for GRIF, the Global Restaurant Investment Forum, it's focused on the in the restaurant space. So bringing kind of the findings of the report with that lens in mind, what do you think are some of the most useful and kind of salient points of the report for the restaurant community and people who are investing and operating restaurants in Saudi or looking to get into the market?
Well, I think that, and there's some very interesting areas here which are both dealt with directly in the report, but also indirectly. And I think let's go straight to the heart of the matter, which is when we're talking about restaurants, we're talking about food and beverage. And of course, one of the ongoing tensions that we have within Saudi is the prohibition of the provision of alcohol. And whilst we don't talk about that directly in the report, many of the people that we spoke to did talk to us about it and about the issues that relate to that. And I think what's really interesting about this is that increasingly, this is actually less of a problem than it used to be from an external perspective for brands wanting to come in and develop their hospitality opportunities. Because in fact, what we see is that all of the trends that relate to a luxury consumer, a younger consumer, and a more health-conscious consumer are increasingly coalescing around the idea that you really don't need to drink alcohol to have a great holiday.
And that's very interesting.
Somewhat serendipitously, we are seeing the growth of a global consumer who is not putting alcohol front and center in their idea of what a great holiday actually means. And this sense that actually their holiday is about a personal, conscious discovery, adventure, journey, experience that is based around mind, body, and soul, where actually drinking less alcohol often sits at the heart of that journey, is a very interesting part of what's going on here. And as I said, whilst we don't address that specifically in the report, we do go through these kind of key issues around our luxury customer, the rise of health and well-being being a key factor here. And as we know, all of the international statistics are showing us that we now have a global consumer under the age of 30 whose mindset is about consuming less alcohol. So I think first and foremost, that is one of the most preeminent issues of concern for the restaurant sector within the kingdom.
I think one of the other things about food and about the kind of the whole process of creating restaurants, one of the people we interviewed, he said, look, either it ends up being the cruise ship framework, which is where you have 20 different cuisines and cultures all sitting cheek by jowl with you each day as part of your buffet experience. I go to the Japanese zone, or I go to the French zone, or whatever. And he said, look, these things have existed, and there's a massive pushback against them for many reasons, and mainly to do with culture. What is it we're experiencing here? Are we seeing it and tasting it and testing it in a different way? And I think one of the things that struck us about the current movement is to create food activities around, to Chris's point, well-being, around health, around the senses, around the sense of experience. So already we're breaking up the taxonomy, which is about, I've got 6 days in a place. Gosh, I can have 22 cuisines. I'm selling it in volume. I'm not selling it in value. And I think that the second part of the process is, a lot of the time, as we know, it's not just about food. It is about design, and it is about the architecture, and it's about the interiors. And again, I think Saudi has pretty much spotted that in bringing in exemplary architects and designers and interior specialists who are not known for their grandiose, great, high-kick, showtime moments. They are the people who do reflect taste, discernment. And I say that because I do think, if I'm looking at cultures like Dubai, they've carefully chosen a route that is successful. They've hit on that route. And it is about the party moments. It is about the fireworks. It is about 24/7 eating and live neon. And I think Saudi, in opposition, has chosen a route that places the higher levels of food consumption, the higher issues about design, the higher issues about health and well-being at the heart of his agenda. So if I'm a restaurateur, in my head looking at, or a hotelier, I'm almost splitting how I look at my future in both places. And I say that because, as you know, a lot of the hotels, we work with a lot of hotels across the globe. There is an assumption that if I'm the Mayborn in London, I'm going to open the same kind of experience in Saudi with a bit of finessing, but not really thinking about what it is I'm trying to do. And I think the bit the report was trying to bring out, there's quite a big section on kind of food and the food moment, is how you look at what's there, what the appetite is, what the international sensibility is, local needs, and then you go, okay, what is it I'm offering? What is it I need to bring or take out? Because the other question I have is increasingly people traveling from places like Riyadh and that are looking, what are they looking for when they leave the country? That's also the issue that restaurateurs need to think about. That's how you increase your ley line or your footprint, not by just taking things in, but by taking and reseeding things in other parts of the world that perhaps this unconverted group particularly...
That's very interesting, because there's Foresight Data did a really interesting presentation last year about looking at Saudi consumers and tracing where they're eating in other parts of the world, and then using that data to develop concepts. Now I'm conscious that we're running out of time here, but I wanted to ask you, one of the things that I found really quite insightful was that you've got the future poll as part of this, and it was 59% of the young cohort you surveyed. They are prioritizing fine dining and gourmet experiences, which I found quite interesting, that they're spending their money and prioritizing that as something that they want to do with their time and with their cash. How would you cater to them? So how would you advise? I know we talked about some of these things just now, but if you're a restaurateur in the market, how would you create a concept for this young cohort in particular? What are some of the things that you would make sure that you would pay attention to in bringing a concept to life?
Well, that's a really great question. And there are actually, what I think is interesting about it is that there are a number of different routes to take, because what we've observed about the behavioral patterns of this particular cohort is that they're not just single-minded in their approach to how they engage with luxury. And our wider research into luxury, from which the Saudi New Codes is based, looking at what we call our states of luxury, identifies the fact that luxury consumers like to be able to play in different pools of luxury consumption and behavior according to their temperament and their own personal mindset, but also where they are at a particular point in time. And so what we most definitely see with consumers under 30 is a real desire to investigate and play with more traditional tropes around the heritage of luxury. So we've seen within younger consumers a real return to quite formalized dining experiences with a focus on the quality of the porcelain, the silverware, the flatware, the crystal that's being used. And so that things are often about really quite elevated dining experiences, which is why we've seen the continued growth of the Michelin star category in its more formal iteration. Whilst at the same time, of course, we've continued to see globally that breaking down of those traditional formal approaches towards culinary experience, where we've moved both into the idea of the gourmet experience that takes you through 8 to 10 to 12 to 15 courses that are often more casual in their approach and are experience driven, into this new category that we've seen emerge that's been very popular with our under 30s, which is where actually the food and the quality of the food, the culinary experience, is being married with an even higher level of experiential engagement that really verges towards the theatrical, where often it's not just that you're taken on a journey of plates. You are actually moving into different areas or environments within your dining experience, so that you're actually going on a physical journey. You're actually being moved into different spaces, and waiters become actors. And that's, again, something that we've seen more and more of, where this notion of storytelling and immersive digital experience takes us into, again, that idea that it's not just that it's Instagrammable or TikTokable. It's this idea that actually the physical and the digital and the experiential all coalesce around the culinary moment.
I think just to add to that, the key point, and certainly one of the things, not just from the report, but globally, it was a phrase used by one of our interviewees, and they said it is the storification of the food journey that will become essential. So what is it you're telling? How are you telling it? What am I learning when I eat? Because what we discovered, particularly with that group under 30, education comes from doing, seeing, smelling, tasting, rather than just from reading and the traditional ways we consume knowledge. So if you can push that storification at all points of the engagement, that's a huge ability or a huge way, not just to please them, but also for them to be able to take, visualize, broadcast, so the Snapchat thing again, take that back to other people. So I think the storification bit, do not underestimate technology and its role in food. There is an assumption that one is a hard synthetic thing and the other is a soft, malleable, sensual human thing. They are all the same and they need to be deployed collectively to make the experience work. And I think the final bit is to Chris's point earlier about this reduction in alcohol consumption. There is also a massive, and I mean this across generational behaviors, a reduction in meat-based consumption. So while plant, vegan, etc. would have seemed to be a kind of minority pursuit, less than 1% of the population, now across the world, it sits between 5 to 7, 7 to 9. If I am a business person and I could control 3 to 4% of a market, I am doing very well, thank you very much. And the other reason I'm doing very well is because even if I'm a meat consumer, there will be days, because of my diet, because of my religion, because of my involvement in what I call the kind of Snapchat community, where I will think about plant-based, I will think about the reduction and that ability it has to help the planet. So behind my consumption, there is a consciousness and a decision-making process that will go, okay, all things being equal, does this help the planet or not help the planet? I'm not saying we do that consciously. Increasingly, we are making it part of our food consideration journey. And with those things in mind, I think it will be easy for a restaurateur to create the great menu that balances experience, technology, storification with needs, desires, that sense of, wow, this is a great meal in itself, because that's what people look for. But I think now what we're bringing to the table is greater than some of the parts of the things I find on that table. And that's why I think that opportunity to reinvent and redo, and also final bit, look, we when we did the survey, the future poll, this assumption again that somehow people are not sophisticated about how they eat and where they eat. Synthetic, which is coming up the menus, versus organic, which is also on the menus, they are now equal. And when you speak to under 30, they see synthetic as a legitimate way to reduce the impact of types of consumption on the planet. So previous generations didn't see that. They saw synthetic as a Frankenstein food.
Yes,
I don't know if
yes,
you remember that
so.
kind of phrase originally. Frankenstein. And now we're going, okay, bio meats, synthetic meats, alternative meats are a huge part of our discourse. So if I look at Snapchat, the influencers and followers who are talking about these things are equally great to those of us talking about just plain organic. So I do think the debate needs to be more open and not to assume, because we're looking at a market that is allegedly not this, not that, not the other, that these kind of debates are not taking place. If you're dealing with the under 30s, they are going to be way ahead of you as a restaurateur as to what they will eat and how they see that balancing out, not a dietary issue, but a saving the planet issue. And that's, I think, part of the story you're bringing to the table when they sit down.
Well, that's really fascinating. Chris and Martin, I'm looking forward to hearing this at length at Griff at FHS Saudi on the 29th of April. We're very excited to have you both with us. And Ada, as the commissioner of the report, as the one who kind of brought it to life, for you, just to have the final word, what was the most exciting finding? What did you kind of get the report back and think, wow, this is something that is really illuminating?
Yes. So let me go back to the previous question, because obviously having been in hospitality.
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
And 25 restaurants in the country, I think as well it's nice to give a little bit of sense of what is happening in Saudi when it comes to F&B. So I think the most important thing of brands that brands need to take into account when they come into the region and into the kingdom is, first of all, two phenomena. So one is to have in mind that the entertainment is moving from the private realm to the public realm. And that is something that Saudi had not seen in many decades. And there is then the second thing, which is Saudi pride and entrepreneurship, which is happening in the F&B sectors. So the first one, when we say about we are moving into the public realm, the report has a very interesting piece of data, which says that 90% of Riyadh eats out once a week. And when it comes to that, and we are an international brand thinking to come in, is are we facilitating the access of these most beloved brands where Saudis eat at in the world to have to happen within the realm of the country? And that is now more and more a possibility. Key restaurant groups in the country bringing those brands that are favorite in Saudi Arabia, in Cannes, in London, and so on. And you find this Saudi luxury consumer eating at those places. Good news is those brands are making their way into the kingdom. Second thing is when we talk about entrepreneurship, there is a homegrown business that is starting to come up. And we see that in the appearance of, first of all, coffee shops, which we talk about are the new socializing spaces when we move from the private to the public. And we see that is something that the youth is investing in, and they are launching their entrepreneurial careers into first touch points of coffee shops and places where the youth can congregate. And especially if you are in Riyadh, at midnight and at 1 a.m., all of the coffee shops are packed.
They're like nightclubs. It's incredible. The first time I saw it, I couldn't believe it.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we are trying to, and if I were a restaurateur today coming in, is can we create homegrown brands, either with the collaboration of youth and these starting entrepreneurs, or can we create brands in the upscale category, which is a little bit empty right now? You have a fast casual and you have a fine dining, which is something that is very traditional in the Middle East, but the homegrown category is slowly starting to come up through either burger shops, which is very common, as you know, either pastry shops or coffee shops. And I think that's the opportunities. Can we help the homegrown entrepreneurs and youth to actually develop that F&B ecosystem for us? through maybe, initial stances of collaboration. So that I thought that was quite interesting. And that's my hope, is that the homegrown business can grow in the future, because that's where we will see really the first chef, first operators that are truly Saudi come up.
I'm so pleased that you mentioned that, because I really feel like that is where the opportunities are in the market currently. And I think that that's where we're going to see a lot of success stories, and we're going to see a lot of growth. Because I feel in a lot of ways, the Saudi market has been, it's been lacking that kind of the strong homegrown players. And as you said, there's a real gap in the market in that kind of elevated section, which is empty. Well, not empty, but, there's a lot of space, I think, at the moment, slowly coming up. And it will be very interesting, I think, to see how the market looks in the next 2 to 3 years, because I, for one, feel it's going to look quite different to what we see at the moment. And Ada, is there anything else that you would like to add? Sorry, we'll cut this, but just anything else that you wanted to, or Chris or Martin, that you feel?
I think the F&B bit was important. I think you're going to need.
But it was very important. We need that. So, and I wasn't sure whether you were happy to talk about your previous kind of experiences, but if you are, great. That's wonderful. I'm glad we've got that.
The only other thing I would add is that, because I think it was such a fantastic sentiment, was that I've already mentioned them, but one of the key people, the industry experts that we spoke to for our research was Rosanna Chopra, who's the executive director at Red Sea Global. And she said to us again, which I think exemplifies the report, which is that it was an inside-out view, was she said that my ask to the world is to allow this incredible nation full of bright, young, brilliant people to grow and evolve. And if we've been part of that process to really create a lens through which people can look at the opportunities and what's going on in Saudi Arabia differently, then I think we would have done a good job with this report.
So, Ada, how do you think the government's helping facilitate new opportunities for up-and-coming entrepreneurs? And we mentioned the entertainment element. What's the government doing to kind of facilitate entertainment within the kingdom?
So I think that there is a strong focus on entertainment in the kingdom, and that goes alongside with the agenda of Saudis consuming Saudi rather than Saudis consuming other parts of the world. And how do we move within Saudi entertainment from private spaces to public spaces through strong programming in entertainment, in arts, in culture, in sports. And that obviously, through that strong programming, which takes people out of the house and takes people to stay in the country and not travel to see amazing art elsewhere, I think that's a great opportunity as well for F&B entrepreneurs who want to test their project, wants to test the concept, want to start an entrepreneurial career within the F&B, to find spaces that are not brick and mortar, where they can test those concepts and then start making their way into the F&B business.
So just touching on one other element that you mentioned is social dining, because I feel like that is coming up as well. You've got like Al Mamlaka, which has been very successful. You've got Time Out, which is coming in, I think, next year. And also there's Boksu in Jeddah. How do you feel that Saudi is responding to the social dining movement?
I think Saudi is exposed to social dining movement through their travels in the world. And I think it should be well perceived, but I think what it will do mostly is contribute to that homegrown business that we were talking before, and providing a platform for all of those small businesses that are coming up, amazing chefs that are coming up, to have a space within those communal dining spaces to showcase their concepts. And that again goes to Saudi pride, Saudi enterprise, and really providing the Saudi consumer with everything they see abroad within their own country.
Fabulous. Well, thank you all so much. Very much looking forward to hosting you at Griff at FHS. And we shall see you in Riyadh. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.